Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another recasting video where, under the recommendation of Jaw from my Twitch chat, I am continuing on with, again, a kind of series I've done in the past of recasting seasons that end with the number 6. If they were fans versus favorites, where obviously Micronesia was fans versus favorites, we got Huramoan as fans versus favorites too, both seasons that end with 6, and again, I've done a recasting Ghost Island if it was fans versus favorites, to where I guess we're doing the Amazon. So this video will be running through the cast of Survivor the Amazon, narrowing it down from a group of 16 to a group of 8 to be a fans tribe, while we will then run through Survivor history up to that point, seasons 1 through 5, and create a favorites tribe of that group. So let's just jump right into it. I will be starting off this video by running through the cast of the Amazon, talking about who did and did not make the cut. So let's start off with Ryan Aiken. He didn't make the cut. And he wasn't a fan of the show, would not fit the fans tribe. And while that hasn't stopped them in the past, I do feel like that is something that I at least take in consideration. And then mixing out the fact that, again, archetype-wise, there's other people in this archetype that I think are more likely. Again, I did not leave Ryan on the cast. Next, we got Janet Koth. And also, no, I don't think Janet's someone I'm particularly high on needing on a Survivor, fans versus favorites, so I did not put her on. Dan Liu is someone that I did put on. Dan Liu is someone that, well, I think you can qualm the fact that is he a fan or not, which, again, I don't think he was that big of a fan. I do think he's someone that at least adds diversity to this cast. I mean, this is a cast obviously very much lacking diversity, as with most old school Survivor seasons, and I think having Dan there to, again, add to the diversity of this season is, again, a positive there. So, again, I put Dan on. I also ended up putting Joanna on, and for similar reasons. Again, I think when looking at the women of this cast, especially by the end of it, there's not another POC in sight, to where I think keeping Joanna on the cast here was something that was kind of a necessity to me, and it does feel like she's a very different character from everyone else we got here. So again, I kept her on. Next, we got Jean, and I didn't keep Jean on because Jean's kind of boring, and realistically, I think she's in a similar archetype to a certain other person that made the cut, to where, again, I think I just picked that person over Jean. I also did not put in Shauna. Shauna was kind of close, though. Shauna was kind of fighting for that last spot on this cast for me, and I did end up going with other people over her. Now, I think there is some appeal to Shauna and the fact that I do think she's a bit different than some of the other younger women that were on the board here, and her being this, like, girl next door, though she's also someone that, again, I don't know if she was, like, the biggest fan in the world, where, considering I feel like there's other people that were a bit more blatantly fans, I did end up cutting her from this list. Next, we got Roger, and I did put Roger on. I considered it for a bit, essentially fighting for a spot with a certain other person that we'll later talk about. So I did end up going with Roger here, specifically because I do think he was here to create conflict, and I think he's someone that was intentionally cast here as, again, this a bit of a misogynistic figure, but also someone that had very conservative views that would get into fights with a certain other person on the cast, where, again, I do think there were reasons why Roger was on the cast. I don't think that really changes here, so, again, I did put him on. Dave Johnson, someone that I did not put on. He was someone that, again, also fighting for that spot that Ryan Aiken was, and, again, a spot that I end up giving to a certain person that we'll talk about. But again, I just don't think Dave Johnson was a big fan of the show and not someone that I'm really clamoring to be on this cast. I did put on Dina onto this cast, and too, first, she was one of the bigger locks on the board for me. She was a big fan of the show. I think alongside a certain person we'll talk about later, one of the biggest fans of the show on this cast. Someone that I think is very clearly the pick that you're going to go with for, like, the older woman on the cast, where, again, I thought Dina was a pretty clear-cut choice here. Next, we're talking about Alex Bell, and I did put Alex on the cast. Now, again, I think Alex was fighting for that spot with the likes of Dave and Ryan and a certain other person we'll be talking about later, of this, like, guy in his, like, late 20s, early 30s, athletic, attractive sort of guy. I do feel like Alex Bell fit that mold the best, while also, again, was someone that at least was somewhat a fan of the show. And also, again, I think they cast him here to have conflict with Roger, to where, again, I think there's a lot of reasons to have Alex on this cast. So, again, I ended up going with him. I did not put Christy on the cast, and Christy was another one of these people, like Shauna, was like a last second cut. I did very much consider it. Obviously, Christy being the first deaf player of Survivor is a reason to cast her here. However, the reason I did not go with her is because, again, she's not a fan of the show, but, again, it feels weird to put her on the fans tribe. And while obviously I could have still done so either way, I think mixing out of the fact that I feel like it is a bit weird to put the first ever deaf contestant on a season that she'll be overshadowed by the fact that there are all these favorites on the season, that there will be this fans versus favorites theme. Again, I feel like it probably would have been better off for Christy just be on another season where she would have been able to get more of her own time to shine. Now, I did end up putting up Heidi on this cast, and Heidi is the one that I was debating with Shauna and with Christy. And again, I think those two are very different than Heidi, where Heidi is very similar to a certain person that we'll talk about later. So again, that made me contemplate not putting Heidi on this cast. Yeah, again, I still end up going with it. I do feel like Heidi is obviously another, like, younger woman to add this cast, which, again, there's not that many in the grand scheme of things here. Well, someone that I don't remember how big of a fan she necessarily was, but she's someone that definitely knew the show and was coming into the game wanting to play strategically, to where, again, I felt like Heidi was the one that intrigued me the most. I did not put Butch on the cast, and I considered it, again, Butch was fighting for a spot of Roger. I do feel like at the end of the day, Roger was probably cast a lot more like intentionally, in the fact that, again, he was someone that was cast to be this very confrontational figure, where I feel like Butch just feels a lot more normal. Again, I like Butch. I thought he did bring some fun character moments to the show, though I think if you're cutting down this cast to only one older guy, I do feel like Roger's the one that you're more likely to cast. Next up, we got Rob Cesternino, and I mean, this was obviously a lock. I mean, obviously he is pretty much the definitive fan at this point in Survivor history. He was probably the biggest super fan on the show up to this point, and the only thing that would make me qualm with potentially putting him on here is the fact that obviously he was not meant to be on the Amazon initially. He actually went through the casting process of Big Brother 3 and then later get transferred over to Survivor pretty late into the process, so where, considering that fact, I think you could debate if Rob would even be on here from a more practical standpoint, as he was such a late addition, to where if they were only getting 4 men, then like would he have been one of those men to make the cut? But again, when for fans versus favorites tribe, I feel like he's the definitive fan to put on the cast here. Now, I did not put Matthew on the cast, and for me, again, Matthew is fighting for the same spot as Alex. I feel like Alex is more of the traditional, like, athletic, attractive guy that they would cast over Matthew, to where I don't think Matthew makes a cut of only 4 men from the fan side of thing to make it on, especially considering, again, he was not really a fan, or while he was like this big like survivalist, and that is something that has some appeal to it, I do think they would go with Alex over him. So again, I did not put him on this cast. And the final person is obviously the winner of the season. We got Jenna Maraska, and I did put Jenna on the cast. I think Jenna, again, is a big fan of the show. Again, I think alongside Dina and Rob, one of the bigger fans here, someone that was coming into the game wanting to play this like very strategic game. And again, I think you can qualm it if she should be here alongside Heidi. And to be fair, again, I would cut Heidi over Jenna. I think Jenna's more blatantly a fan. But again, I think there is some debate there on whether or not to put both of them. Yeah, at the end of the day, I do feel like Jenna in herself was such a shoe-in here, to where, again, she easily made the cut. So again, that is the fan side of the cast. Now let's get to the favorites. So with the favorites, obviously we'll be running through the first 5 seasons of the show and talking about who would have made the cut there. Also want to mention, obviously, the fact that these players are people that did not go on to win the game. I mean, that's kind of a trope with fans' favorite seasons. Now, again, it's not necessarily this hard, fastened rule that was actually in place. I would not be that shocked that they did end up putting a winner on, though, just keeping with what we have seen in actuality, I decided not to put winners on this board, despite the fact that I think there are definitely winners that potentially would have been made on, specifically Hatch. Now, obviously, there will be 8 favorites making the final cuts, and I did try to make it so that at least one person from each season made the cut, even though, again, some of that might be a bit questionable, but we'll talk about it. But let's start off with Survivor Borneo, where the people that I considered that did not make the cuts, I did very much consider Gretchen. I do feel like Gretchen is someone that I would have expected to be in the running at this point, though, to be fair, I don't believe there's any confirmation that she was even considered by time of All-Stars. Yeah, again, I think Gretchen is someone that, again, was the first big blind side of the show, to where I would have considered her, though I think there's a certain other person that takes her spot. And really, just in general, something to mention here is that obviously archetypes played a major factor into who exactly made the cut, especially when you're not this like big, massive name for the show at this point. Sadly, I don't think Gretchen really fits into that. I did consider Greg Buis. I think the issue here is I don't think Greg would have said yes. I think Greg was someone that was very dismissive of the show initially, to where I do think even if he was called, he would not have said yes. So again, I did not put him on. I did not put on Jenna Lewis. Now, Jenna Lewis is obviously on the actual All-Stars. Yeah, I think when looking at this field, again, we're only having 4 women from previous seasons making the cut, and I do not think Jenna Lewis is one of those that makes the cut. So again, I did not put her on. I did not put on Jervis, and I was very close to. I did very much consider Jervis, and especially from a POC perspective, which is very lacking on this returnee tribe, where straight up there's only one POC in this entire bunch, to where I very much would have wanted Jervis here to kind of balance things out a little bit better. But again, considering the fact that he wasn't really even in the running for All-Stars, did not even make that final cut, I feel like Jervis is someone that I struggle with seeing making the cut here, so I did not put him on. Again, consider Colleen, but Colleen's also in this spot where she probably would have said no, so again, I did not put her on. Finally, did consider Kelly Wigglesworth, though. Again, another one of these that, considering the fact that she wasn't even in the running for All-Stars, I think it's probably something that makes her not particularly likely here, especially considering the 2 people that we will talk about that made the cut are both people from the original Tagi tribe, where again, that would have been a bit much to have 3 people on this tribe from Tagi, so again, did not put Kelly Wigglesworth on. But 2 people I did put on. First up, we got Sue. And Sue Huck is a bit of a question mark here in the sense that, is she really a favorite? I don't think people liked Sue. I actually believe if you were to do a popularity poll, she probably would have been one of the least favorite people from that season. Yet she was just such a massive star on that season, though. Again, obviously her Snakes and Rats speech became so iconic, to where I think she was a shoo-in to come back for All-Stars. Now, I think the other thing you could debate is like, would she want to come back, considering I don't believe she ever had real aspirations to play Survivor again. I think it was really just her coming back for the money, and to be fair, I think that might be a similar case here. But again, I decided screw it. I'm going to put her on. She's such a massive legend of the game to where it would be weird not to. Other person, obviously, again, big fan favorite, you got Rudy. I think there's no real way Rudy would not have made this cast here. I think the only way is, again, thinking that he's too old. But again, they brought him back for All-Stars anyway. So again, I think I would have put Rudy on here as a pretty big lock, even though, again, I think looking at like fan favorites, again, the likes of like Colleen, Jervis could definitely be up there as well. But I do think Rudy was pretty commonly talked about as the most popular player from this season. So again, I did put him on the cast here. Next up for Australian Outback, where we also got two people that made the cut, people that I considered that did not make the cut. Now, I gotta mention Scoopin', to where, again, it's Scoopin'. Obviously, he would not make it nowadays. But at the time, big name. Him falling the fire was considered one of the most iconic moments of the show. However, again, he didn't make All-Stars. And if he's not making All-Stars, I think it's very unlikely he would make a cast like this, which is very condensed. Where I think the only saving grace for him would be is that it's a couple seasons earlier in the show's history. But even then, I do feel like when wanting only at most two people per season, I do think Scoopin' falls out of that grouping to where I don't think he makes it on. Also considered Varner, and again, also modern Varner, not great. But at the time, Varner, it would have been good to have this like LGBT representation. Again, that's another thing this cast is very much lacking. Though, I mean, really, that's just old school Survivor in general. And while, again, I think Varner being on here would definitely add to the LGBT representation. And the fact that Varner, again, was not on All-Stars was something that was pretty damning to me. Even though, again, you can debate the fact that obviously Hatch was on, to where they felt like that was good enough for them, to where maybe he would be more consideration here. Yeah, again, I just think there's some pretty big locks on the board that just kind of ice Varner out of being on the cast. Also considered Alicia. I mean, Alicia is someone that obviously has a very iconic fight with Kimmy, where I think she was pretty fresh on people's minds. Also, she would add to diversity. Also, she would add the physical strength, to where, again, I wanted to keep Alicia here. I just felt like at the end of the day, I just feel like there's bigger names in the grand scheme of things when narrowing it down to only 4 women, while also, again, I wanted to represent every season, to where, again, there was a shot Alicia would have made this cast, yet she did not by the end. Also, again, I want to mention Amber simply because obviously Amber was on All-Stars, but again, there was no way Amber was making the cut on this season, so again, she did not make it on. I also considered Elizabeth, though Elizabeth's another one of these people. I think she would have said no, and it's not like I'm dying for Elizabeth return, but she was a big fan favorite at the time, to where, again, she would have been consideration, but I think she would have said no. So people that did make the cut here. First up, we got Jerry. And I'll say, Jerry obviously is not a fan favorite. People did not like Jerry. She was probably one of the most hated players of all time at this point. However, she was also a big name. And again, I think she's such a big name to where I don't think you can make this cast without her. I feel like that would be a very strange decision to me. For a while, yeah, she doesn't really fit into the favorites moniker. I do feel like at the end of the day, she is such a big name for the show, to where, again, I did put her on here. And also, obviously, got to put Colby. I mean, Colby, obviously one of the biggest fan favorites at this point. Probably the most popular Survivor player up until Pro Islands, to where I do think Colby very handily makes this cast, to where I would be very surprised they did a season like this at this time and did not include Colby for some reason, to where, again, Colby very easily made it on. Next up for Survivor Africa, and only one person made the cut from Survivor Africa, which, again, a bit wonky, specifically due to the fact that Ethan would not be eligible. I think Ethan would have been a top contender, but again, could not be on. But people I did consider did not make it on. I did consider Kelly Goldsmith. Kelly Goldsmith, again, we know was an alternate for the season. I do think she actually would have been a pretty inspired choice. And again, considering the fact that there's not many younger women in consideration from the All-Star field, I mean, she was someone I very much considered. Yeah, again, I did not put her on just because I didn't feel like she really fit the cast by the end of it. I did consider T-Bird, and T-Bird, someone that, again, I would love to see back. I just think archetype-wise, again, it's tough to fit her here. Obviously, we already have Sue on the cast. We have another older woman that we'll talk about. I just think with T-Bird, she was always like 3rd, 4th pick. For, again, had this been a full-blown All-Star season and had T not been there, I could see where T-Bird squeezes on, but considering this is fans' favorites, only 4 women's slots, there's not much to work with. So again, T-Bird did not make it on. I also consider Big Tom, and Big Tom's a weird one here, where Big Tom was a big fan favorite. I think if you were to like look up polls from Survivor Africa, I think Big Tom would definitely be one of the biggest favorites there. Obviously, at the time of All-Stars, he made the top 4 for most popular players, where I did think Big Tom was definitely a big favorite. However, I just think at the end of the day, they're more likely to cast a certain other person than Big Tom. I think you could definitely say that Big Tom is more of a favorite than the person I did put on. Yeah, I do think Big Tom is not as likely a returnee in general, and also I just rather see the other person back anyway, to where I think they have a lot more to bring on a returnee season. So again, I went with them over Big Tom. So the person I did put on here ends up being Lex. And again, I think in general, Lex was one of the more likely returnees at this point. I do think it would have been very difficult to see Lex not be on a returnee season, where I think he was just such a big name from South Africa, was clearly looked at as one of the bigger players of that season. Definitely a very controversial figure where, again, he got very mixed reception, which is why, again, I think at the end of the day, Tom definitely fits the fan favorite moniker a lot more. But I do think Lex is someone that has a lot more to bring on a returning season. I think he's a lot more willing to play the game, and I think he's someone that adds a bit more to this tribe in particular than someone like Big Tom, to where, again, I think at the end of the day, Lex is my personal pick for this spot. Next up for Marquesas, and with Marquesas, I did put 2 people on the cast, and they might be the same people that you would expect. But again, people I considered Hunter, though again, not really that close to making the cut when you have Colby as such a big lock. Again, I don't think there was really a spot for Hunter. I consider Gina Cruz, where obviously she got a big pre-merge edit, one of the biggest pre-merge edits in the history of the show. Though again, when narrowing it down to only 4 women, her also not even making the All-Stars cut, again, I did not put her on. I did consider John Carroll, and John Carroll was a tough one here, where again, like Varner, I do think, again, would have been great to have him for LGBT representation. However, again, I just think it's a bit tough to fit him onto this cast. I think it's a spot where, again, he was not in the running for All-Stars. So again, I just think it's tough to fit him on. To be honest, probably Varner was more likely to be on for me than John Carroll, even though I actually probably would prefer John Carroll in this spot. But again, he did not make it on. I also considered Sean Rector, where obviously would have been great to see Sean Rector on. And Sean's in a spot where, like, again, had he been on All-Stars, I would have been very likely to put him on this cast. Yeah, again, they obviously went with someone else over him, so I decided to pick the other person over him. Also, I had to consider Nalia. I mean, Nalia obviously would have fulfilled that, like, younger woman spot on the cast. Yeah, I just think at the end of the day, it never really felt like Nalia was that close to making it on, even though I believe she was at least asked for All-Stars. Yeah, again, I just think considering the breakdown of this tribe, I do feel like it would have been tough to really squeeze her on, considering who did make it on here. And again, with that, let's talk about it. The people that made it on, first up, we got Boston Rob. And again, people might complain, oh, why is Boston Rob here? Again, he was a pre-jury boot on Marquesas, but again, like, he was on All-Stars, and they clearly loved him. I mean, clearly they loved him and how he played on the island. Clearly loved him at the reunion show, to where I think Rob is definitely very high on production's radars at this current point, to where I think you definitely qualm if he makes a cut of only 4 men. Though, again, looking at it, I think Rob here makes a bit I think having Rob here makes a bit of sense. Again, to balance out having like Rudy here, who's not as great physically, or again, having someone, again, good physically like Rob kind of helps there. And again, I think you could debate if like Big Tom should have been in this spot instead of Rob, though I think having Lex and Tom together on one tribe is probably a bit overpowered as well, to where I think you want people that are at least are not like directly connected like that, to where, again, I think Rob is still a pretty good pick for this spot. So again, he made it on. And obviously the biggest lock from this season, you got to have Kathy. I mean, Kathy, no brainer, very obviously going to make it on. Probably one of the biggest locks for All-Stars at this current point. And again, as I mentioned before, of like Nalia, it's like I think it's tough to fit Nalia and Kathy on this cast, when again, I think it's just in general tough to fit 2 people of any gender from any specific cast, as again, just feels weird that we're like clogging up these like very limited spots of people from the same season, to where I just felt like at the end of the day, Kathy was obviously just such a shoe-in, to where Nalia wasn't particularly close to making it on. And finally, we're moving on to Thailand, where only one person made it on, and it's kind of who you expect. And in general, again, obviously Thailand was not a particularly loved season by them anyway, to where again, I don't think they would have been clamoring to bring someone from Thailand back. Though again, I literally put someone from Thailand back just for the sake of it, where again, you could definitely debate some other people that should have been on here over the person we picked, but yeah, we'll talk about it. Again, people I considered but then not put on, I did not put on Gandia. And Gandia is someone that, again, I would personally like to see back in this spot. I think that would have been very interesting, though at the time, considering how much they laughed off the Gandia situation, I feel like, again, I don't think they would bring her back. Rob Zabatnik obviously was an incredible character and would have been really funny to see back in the spot, but again, I don't think he makes the top 4 men for this grouping. Ken Stafford is someone to mention here, as Ken was someone that was an alternate for All-Stars, to where he at least would have been on their radars, and considering this was immediately after Thailand, I think you can at least consider him, though yeah, I think they would have picked someone like Boston Rob over him even here. I was going to mention Helen. Now again, Helen's very much hurt by the fact that Kathy's a much bigger lock than her, and even beyond that, even Sue is someone in her archetype as well, where yeah, I just think they're obviously much bigger locks, where Helen just gets kind of screwed out a spot in this cast because of that. And I'm going to mention Clay, where again, I don't think Clay would have actually made the cut anyway, but again, I think he's fighting for that Rudy spot. I think they clearly go for Rudy over him. So again, I don't think Clay was particularly close to making on, but the person I did put on here ends up being Sheehan, who obviously made the real All-Stars, and again, this is just a decent spot for her, where again, adds diversity to the cast, and straight up again, diversity of the returnees is very bad. She's literally the only POC on this tribe, which is a very bad look, but there's not many options from old school Survivor, especially when you factor in all these big names, where really Sheehan's like pretty clearly the smallest name of the people that made it on here, though again, she literally was just on the previous season. She obviously made it onto All-Stars, to where again, I think there's a lot of reason why Sheehan would be here, so again, she ended up making the cut. with that, again, that is the entire cast of Survivor the Amazon. If it was fans versus favorites. So from the fans tribe, I did put on Dan Liu, Joanna Ward, Roger Sexton, Dina Bennett, Alex Bell, Heidi Strobel, Rob Sachinino, and Jenna Maraska. On the fans tribe, I did put on Sue Hawk, Rudy Bosch, Jerry Manthe, Colby Donaldson, Lex Vanderberg, Rob Mariano, Kathy Vavrick O'Brien, and Xian Hong. So that's the entire cast. Now, down the road, I do actually want to do the same thing for Survivor 46, because why not? I might as well just wrap up the series. As beyond that, I'll do the same style of typical content for the channel, more random recasting, casting videos like this, other rankings, other random stuff. So stay tuned for all those things. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.